even if it takes me not 9, but 900 lives.
Greetings, I am Diana Simpson, and I had the opportunity to interview Dr. Shen, an assistant professor at the University of Illinois in Springfield who specializes in counseling and multicultural psychology, specifically Asian American stereotypes. We were discussing stereotypes in general, mostly the connections we have between one another, our individuality, and society. I began by asking how she decided to study stereotyping, to which she responded,
in general, have always been interested in kind of multicultural issues and counseling. So I always knew I always wanted to go into a helping kind of profession. Didn't necessarily always think it would be counseling until I got to college, but always knew that that would be something that I would want to be integrated into my work. Part of that being a cultural minority myself, now I'm branching out, interested in general about discrimination.
This led me to ask if she'd experienced discrimination herself, and it turns out
there have been microaggressions. In the past, when we think about discrimination, overt discrimination, hate crimes or slander, but nowadays the form of discrimination that we see are more subtle.
When I told her I'd considered dressing as a stereotypical Goth, I asked if that would have impacted the performance of an interview.
This happens with everyone. Stereotypes are very kind of automatic processes. We would automatically evaluate or judge someone, and that depend on what stereotypes exist for that individual. Psychologically, we naturally do that, but how we choose to behave or what we do with that information is what is most important.
Next, I wanted to discuss possible generational gaps when it comes to stereotyping, to which she explains,
I do think so. There have been cultural shifts. If we look at generations where in the past it is much more culturally acceptable to use stereotypes. Nowadays, I think there is more of an understanding among the younger generation. It's politically incorrect to be that way. That's also where we see that shift from kind of very overt discrimination to shifting more of these microaggressions.
Then we moved on to perhaps exposure and education of groups to be used to deter stereotyping, and suddenly excited.
Absolutely. I mean, I think unfortunately what we do have is more reliance on media, and media constantly perpetuates stereotypes. There also are a lot of messages that it's okay to joke about stereotypes or groups, and so those are some of the messages that maybe the younger generation gets exposed to. Stereotypes develop because of our previous experiences or messages or portrayals that we see in the media or messages that we get from parents or friends, peers. It's really only through greater diversity and greater interactions that we're able to break those kind of cognitive schemas and getting to know people at a much deeper and personal level that you're able to break and look beyond the stereotype.
In this, I mentioned some people see others going into the Gothic subculture as a retaliation or rebellion to their parents and others, to which Dr. Shen explained the difference from the parents depends on the culture and how they handle their pressure or expectations. Western culture is more individualistic by nature, therefore are more accepted even though they may not meet the family or social norms. However, collectivistic cultures are more harsh on those who differ from the norm than they would just being part of the collective. Also, context plays a key role in the development of stereotypes and what kinds of characteristics are attributed to them. This is how she also explains how characteristics help us classify things as humans naturally do, so when we encounter new situations, we can have the awareness to predict the outcome. This also brings in the aspect that many people are not aware they're stereotyping and in turn subconsciously perform inappropriately in given situations or worry about them performing the stereotype and not want to be seen as racist or anything. This leads us to think about the negative characteristics of stereotypes in order to place someone other than themselves as inferior.
Differences makes us feel uncomfortable and then therefore anxious.
Moving on to the societal point of view, as in the impact of stereotyping on their identity, Dr. Shen expanded this by stating,
Western culture is very individualistic, more of an emphasis on wanting to be unique and stand out, to be different, to be valued for your uniqueness. There's a balance, so there is still that need to feel like I belong, but that I want to be recognized for being different from everyone else, one amongst many.
There is a phrase that goes, "Don't feed the trolls," and I decided to change this up to "Don't feed the stereotype," where the line is drawn when someone wants to be part of a culture, but then goes too far in feeding the stereotype. When asked if feeding the stereotype is always a negative, she replied,
Not necessarily. It depends on how you define negative. And when I think about identity development, I always think about it as a developmental process that involves going through different stages or different experiences in order to finally come to a place where you feel comfortable with who you are within the culture and society that you're in. Kind of lose your sense of self and means of covering up who you are and your own self-identity.
Next, I wanted to address the definition of the norm defined by society.
Whatever is kind of commonplace in the culture. Oftentimes, it doesn't represent the majority in numbers. Here in the United States, we are reaching a point where racial and ethnic minorities are going to be the majority. Yet, they won't be the ones in power. It's those who are in power define the norms.
Lastly, I wanted to discuss nonverbal communication, as it is 83% of our initial analysis or stereotyping of someone's character. More specifically, how one decides how to keep their individuality while remaining acceptable by societal standards. Not to be shunned, but also not to conform.
That's an individual process. Where that balance is varies from person to person. As long as they're able to come to a place where they're comfortable with themselves and can cope with discrimination or stereotyping.
I'm glad I was able to discuss stereotypes with Dr. Shen. Hopefully, this will help open our minds to the conscious and subconscious processes in stereotyping and helps us be more aware of them and try to combat the demon that is stereotyping.
Thank you.